Y'all, it's Dave Parrots, the Fund CXO and founder of Signal Fund Services. We're back with episode 8 of our series on minimum viable venture fund operations. And today we're going to be talking about the service provider scopes of work, how they came to be, and as an emerging manager, how you should be thinking about them as you build your team. So if you're a GP, LP, fund operator, or service provider, this series is for you. And we are going to be pulling back the curtain on how modern venture funds are built and how they operate day to day. All right, so today we're talking about service providers. And really what we want to do is kind of start from the beginning. We're going to focus on finance and ops. How did these service providers come to be? How should you think about putting them together? What do they do for you? And where do you need to build around their scopes of work? So we'll dive into kind of a little bit deeper than just what do they do for you day to day. All right, so from the beginning, as we've said before, you're kind of tasked as an investment manager, managing someone else's money, to one, search for the opportunities, and that's what we're all here for. But you also got to think about the fiduciary duties that you have and legal responsibilities, and those kind of form the jobs that you need to do. And typically, people find jobs based on their skills and they're grouped together. And so, finance and ops, what we'll talk about today, tend to go together. And you'll see in a back office of a venture fund that it's very finance and ops heavy, just to make sure that the reporting is correct, that our taxes are filed and done on time, and that LPs are kept in the loop about what's happening in the fund. So, from the finance and operations perspective, we would think about how a big firm would take this basics and build out their team. Right. And so if you could imagine in a much larger firm, they'll have a CFO or COO, but a partner in charge of the back office, providing that strategic level insight. And then they might, if the resources allow for, and they're able to hire specialists depending on what their needs, they could have teams in charge internally doing their own accounting, doing their own tax and compliance, treasury functions, and cash management. And then they'll also be bringing in team members to help do the basic bookkeeping and recording of transactions, and then do some of the forecasting and planning and finance functions that are not necessarily accounting based, right? So a big team has lots of opportunity to kind of specialize and get talent to overlook each of these specific areas. But if you're just building your firm, if your budget isn't necessarily the same, then you have to think about how to piece together the tools and service providers that are in the market to kind of build or replicate this. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, LPs expect your taxes to be correct and filed on time, and their K-1s to be delivered, and the accounting to be right, and for you to make sure that all of the data that decisions are used that are made off of is accurate, right? So you've got to figure out how to deliver or build a team to deliver to your LPs and founders an experience that maybe other managers have more resources. So let's think through how we would do that, right? So a complete finance team for a venture fund would probably start with a CFO at the top, providing strategic coverage, architecting the system. They may have mid-level people that have, a decade plus of experience on the finance side. We think of them as directors. On the accounting or tax side, you might think of them as a controller or director, but they're performing that mid-level check and review on the basics that need to be delivered. And then junior folks that are brand new to the industry, that are getting their first couple of jobs, first couple of years, they start out as associates or accountants doing the actual work, learning day to day. That's what a complete finance team would look like. And over the last 15 or 20 years, specifically in private equity and venture, we've seen service providers come about due to regulation and some changes where third party fund administrators, auditors, and tax providers are much more common in the venture space. And LPs have come to expect that your books and records and your tax and all these things are going to be accurate despite whether you're a solo GP running a 10 or $15 million fund or a team of 1,000 plus running a $30 billion venture fund, right? And so what we need to do is look at the service providers, audit, tax, bank, and legal. Those are the big five. And how do they fit into this complete finance team triangle? So typically, your fund admin will provide that basic accounting and books and records, financial statement preparation. They have a team of CPAs and specialists and controllers to make sure that it's correct. Then you have the auditors who are double checking both your internal processes, but also your fund admin, helping check to make sure that things are following the procedures and that the valuations are correct and that the basic accounting is correct, right? And then ultimately your tax team specialists in the specific types of finance and tax where we operate that are giving us great advice, right? You can go to a firm that has a track record, lots of people, lots of experience and breadth, and get what you need from them versus trying to grow that talent internally and have them have all of the special, unique things that you need, right? So there is a service provider world that the scopes of work that they generate kind of take up a good chunk of what you need to build out your finance team. And those service providers know it. And they've picked the tasks that are highly automatable, very structured and streamlined, and work well with being outsourced to a third party. And they've definitely, over the last 20 years, constructed scopes of work. And we're starting to see some differentiation between them as some focus on service and others focus on technology. And let's hope that the best winners of them all will have both service and technology. But as these service providers develop, they're not quite covering everything. So they leave a lot for a venture fund to cover down on outside of those scopes of work. And so that's something that GPs need to be mindful of. If it's not being sent to Carta or Duro or Frank Rimmerman or to Witham or Weaver, then your team or you is going to have to figure out how to handle and cover down on that task. And so what we often see is the accounting piece, the tax, the legal, that gets outsourced. And internally, teams build different models for how they cover things like FP&A, forecasting, scenario planning, fund modeling. Those are handled either by team members or they hire a firm, a fractional CFO to cover down on it, and then help architect the rest and project manage. Okay, so now that we've talked about how the different service providers fit into a complete finance team, and we understand the scopes of work that they will focus on, the automated, the streamlined, and the outsourceable, what we need to think about then is if the scopes of work are relatively similar amongst all these service providers, what is different? And it's the execution level. It's what you should expect from the service. So table stakes is kind of what we think about. What is the bare minimum? And it's not necessarily a bare minimum, it's the expected for what's considered good. And so things that we can think about in all of these are responsiveness of the delivery team. Do they meet their deadlines? And do they explain what they're doing to you and feel as if they're partnering with you versus it's very transactional and it's just send us documents, we send you answers. If that's the way you're starting to feel with some of your service providers, know that there are others out there that are not providing that. The other big piece of table stakes that we see often is technology and how well these firms adopt it. So the best platforms out there today are offering easy to use LP portals, integrations with other best-in-class tools across the banking and finance and tech stack, like QuickBooks and Ramp and Xero and banking software. They're also giving GPs and fund operators new tools to understand what's happening in the fund day to day and month to month and as quarters close. So you should expect both responsive service and good tech from best-in-class providers. If they're not doing that, they're not best in class. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today, and there's still a lot more to go. If you have questions about the scopes of work that you should be interested in signing up for, or whether or not your service providers are meeting those scopes of work, we're happy to talk about it. Please feel free to reach out. I'm Dave at Signal Fund Services. We're here by email or LinkedIn, and we'll see you out there. Talk soon.